So let me welcome everyone to this meeting, sponsored by the National Alliance of Women's Organizations here in the UK. And its title is Harnessing COVID Recovery for a Positive, Sustainable Future for All. And we've got some wonderful speakers today. And I should say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and for some people, very good night as well. You never know where people are these days in CSW. So I've put the details of our first speaker, Maja Groff, into the chat. I'm going to put it in again because some people have just arrived and they won't be able to see probably see the chat that's been up there. I don't want to spend time from Maja, just to say that she is a woman of extremely many talents, as you can see from the chat. She's a lawyer, international lawyer. She's a feminist of the first order. One of our abiding conversations is how one of the organizations that we are both involved in can understand gender equality more effectively, even though it's one of their values. I just have to say how much I admire her stamina. You'll see that she and two others won a very prestigious award on global governance around how to reform the United Nations. And so I'm starting with Maja today because she is going to give us a little bit about what she's doing. Well, I'll just hand straight over to you, Maja. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks so much, Wendy. And yeah, I'll just give 5 or 7 minutes, and really looking forward to discussion, and very interesting to listen to you all about this terrible situation we have in the Ukraine, and would love to also discuss those issues further because they're so important, and international law is sort of my field. So I think it's very interesting how the whole international legal system is responding. But that's a whole nother story. Wendy asked me today, to talk a little bit about how 2 organizations I'm involved with are integrating sustainability and gender for this positive, sustainable future in the light of the COVID-19 recovery. So I'll just share a few thoughts and insights for 2 of the organizations I'm quite heavily involved with. One is the Global Governance Forum, which I established along with the 2 colleagues Wendy mentioned, based on our comprehensive UN reform proposals, and now we're working on a whole set of global governance issues. And then EBBF, Ethical Businesses Building the Future, where Wendy and I serve on the elected board there. So first of the Global Governance Forum, and I really invite you to look at the website if you're interested in sort of, managing our global risks, global problems from a global perspective, more looking down. How can we as a united international community really tackle the key problems of our time? How can we work together much more intensively to prevent crises like we see in the Ukraine? And we would comment probably that the crisis we see in the Ukraine is, and also the threat of a potential calamitous third world war with exchange of weapons of mass destruction all over the world. That's a risk also because of the fragility of our current weapons governance architecture, the fragility of our international justice and court systems, the fact that the UN Security Council has not been, reformed and has not evolved in 76 plus years since the founding of the UN, et cetera. We talk about those issues in our book and other books, other documents and articles. But I guess now, of course, given the reality of we have this COVID-19 economic recovery that we're all grappling with, and then at the same time, the climate and ecological planetary emergencies, where we have to try to merge those two efforts. And the main initiative I've been involved with related to the Global Governance Forum is this Climate Governance Commission. And we've done a number of research pieces focused on sort of the double leapfrog of addressing the climate crisis, but also addressing the SDGs, international development, poverty concern, electrification of rural areas, et cetera. Like how can we accelerate the economic and social well-being of people around the world at the same time as we address the climate crisis. And then, of course, now intersected with that is how do we divert and make sure all the COVID monies are channeled into this green transition, which is a huge challenge and still a problem. So in terms of the gender dimension, I'm in a new phase of managing this Climate Governance Commission, and I'm very interested. I'll be looking at not only sort of from the policy perspective, how important women are in terms of general governance, integrity, and efficacy. And I'll mention a tool that the Global Governance Forum has developed in a moment, but not only from the policy perspective, but also I'm looking in the next 2 years of this Climate Governance Commission, looking for narratives about how we make it not just a double leapfrog, but a triple leapfrog to also get gender equality and equality of men and women and engagement as part of also this green transition, this global transition that we have to go through. So if any of you have ideas about what the narratives should be, because often, you know, there's a lot of data and discourse about how women are disproportionately affected by the effects of climate change and war and other disasters, but also as agents of change and key protagonists in the solution. And if we accelerate gender equality, we know that we will be much better equipped to solve a whole range of these global challenges, but indeed, in terms of the sustainability transition and also the COVID-19 recovery. And so the one flagship project of the Global Governance Forum is this Global Gender Equality and Governance Index, which looks at countries around the world to analyze data from international organizations like the World Bank, IPU, various UN agencies, to kind of rank the levels of gender discrimination and looking at gender equality divided into several pillars: governance, education, work, entrepreneurship, and violence. So this is trying to, you know, look at where countries are at and focus on this governance angle. And we know from research that, for example, if you have more women in parliament, they'll pass more progressive climate legislation, environmental legislation, and it actually has a correlation with decreased CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, there's the very concrete economic evidence and indicators that economic, social prosperity are very much linked to women, gender equality in governance and more women in governance. So I'm really keen about how we can make these linkages and really accelerate also, you know, women and men working shoulder to shoulder, and women really, you know, moving further and further into all of these governance and leadership positions in a concrete fashion, and not just, again, a lot of talk. You know, women, peace and security resolution, there's been quite a lot of talk, but still really not enough effects on the ground. So then next, the organization Ethical Businesses Building the Future that Wendy and I serve on the governing board together. I think our work in EBBF in terms of merging sustainability and gender and mainstreaming those two issues is really ongoing throughout all of our activities. And as Wendy was mentioning, we've done a lot of work to try to go deeper within the bodies of the organization, the governing board, the advisory board, our events team, and at basically every event we have to really dig into gender and to have some much more in-depth conversations. So it's not just, you know, women or activists speaking to each other, but we're also speaking with everyone and making sure men are engaged and they know that they have to be protagonists in these issues. So it's a core value of EBBF, gender equality along with sustainability. And just so you know, the mission statement of Ethical Business Building the Future is it's a Baha'i-inspired global learning community that accompanies mindful individuals and groups through daily work and discourse to transform business and the economy, thereby contributing to a prosperous, just, and sustainable civilization. So this theme of like accompaniment of building community, re-examining our workplaces, our companies, our economy, runs throughout all of our activities and events throughout the world, online and in person. Really, I think the great strength of EBBF is it's really building a community of practice and a place to have these very deep, also interpersonal dialogues around gender, for example. And we've talked a lot about, the effects of COVID-19 and how our economies and workplaces are really shifting, and how we respond. And I think like a general challenge for both of these organizations and for all of our work is indeed, okay, how do we mainstream gender sustainability, rethink our relationships, the benefits, the huge societal benefits we have with gender equality, with women in governance at all levels, and then get really, really serious about the green shift. We have the policies, we know what we need to do to make this energy transition, but we're not implementing yet. We don't have the community, the implementation capacity yet at all levels of governance in our various societies. So we have to connect the dots. And the COVID recovery sort of scenario, at the beginning of the pandemic, people talked about the Great Reset. This is an opportunity for a great reset of our societies and rethinking. So now we have a calamitous war on the edge of Europe, yes, that might start World War III. So this can all, however, hopefully be some kind of great reset if we can focus on our core values and indeed the role of women, gender equality, and in this COVID transition or recovery, not just sustainability, but the just transition kind of issue about economic well-being too, which again, when we see women leaders in various countries at the moment, they are most often promoting these well-being economy models, beyond GDP, and having the well-being of citizens really be the priority. So they're all synergistic, but there's lots of work left to do. So those are my few minutes. I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Maja. I've made a couple of notes of things we'd like to talk to you about later, and maybe people have contribution to make. I'm going to introduce now Christine Muller, and I'm just going to put her details up in the chat for you to see as well, so you can see who Christine is. Kristen and I sit on another board together. Just put these up for you. Sorry, just getting this up. There you go. So as you can see, Christine Muller is the Secretary General of the International Environment Forum. She's a musician by training, but she's a climate activist by passion. I think that's fair to say. And she teaches on climate change and sustainability at the Wilmette Institute out of Chicago. She's, well, maybe I could just hand right over to you, Christine, and tell us, perhaps you could give your speech today too, please.
Okay, sure, thank you. And I will share my screen. Let's see, something happened to my setup, and I don't know. So just a sec. Now it should work. Okay. This should work. Oh no.
Yeah, I
You
see it.
see?
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, but something went wrong.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'll try again. Oh no. Okay, sorry for that, friends. I have to do something first. Okay. There we go. Okay. Now let's try once more. And let's try. Is it working for you?
It is. Thanks so much.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Sorry for the delay. Now, it was wonderful to hear Maja's presentation, and I think this will fit well together because it will hopefully provide a framework for our conversation afterwards. And Wendy already kindly introduced me as the secretary of the International Environment Forum, which is also a Baha'i-inspired professional organization. And its work for a healthy planet is based on science and guided by spiritual and ethical principles. My brief talk on a world-embracing vision for a sustainable future is based on this approach. The environmental crisis is now posing an existential threat to humanity. The human-induced global warming of 1.2 degrees Celsius since the Industrial Revolution is changing the Earth's climate that has been conducive to agriculture for the past 10,000 years. We already experience extreme heat waves and droughts, large-scale water scarcity, and much more destructive storms and floods. Sea level rise will displace hundreds of millions of people living in coastal areas and big cities such as Mumbai, Jakarta, and Miami within the coming decades. The destruction of habitats such as forests, excessive exploitation such as overfishing, and pollution such as plastics and toxic agricultural chemicals, together with climate disruption, have resulted in a catastrophic decline of wild animals and plants. Much of this loss of biodiversity is not easily visible to most people, but you may have noticed the crash of populations of bees, bumblebees, and butterflies, as well as the drastic decline in the mass of insects in general. Around 1 million animal and plant species are now threatened with extinction. The large amounts of toxic chemicals are also seriously harming human health, which we can see in high cancer rates and other human diseases. Heat waves and other climate change impacts are causing increasingly more death and human suffering. By destroying nature, we are not only diminishing the quality of life worldwide, but are ruining the very foundation of human life, of our food security, our livelihoods, our health, and the very existence of future generations. The reason for the deterioration of the environment has been the rapid increase of production and consumption of goods by a growing and increasingly demanding population. The natural and legitimate drive of humans to satisfy their needs has perverted into materialism and consumerism. Today, humanity uses much more of the Earth's resources than nature can replenish. We basically use the equivalent of more than 1.5 planets to provide the resources we use and to absorb our waste. We could identify the underlying cause of environmental destruction as being an attitude of putting self-interest first. My right to accumulate stuff, my company's profits, my country's advantage over others. The pursuit of this self-interest has cultivated aggressiveness and led to the domination and oppression of others. This is the drive behind wars, colonization, and slavery, which sadly continue to this day. And I would argue that the oppression of women is also rooted in the same narrow self-interest that has become culturally ingrained. Some people conclude that human beings are intrinsically egotistical, aggressive, and prone to violence. However, this is only a partial truth. All these traits are part of the animal nature of humans. According to the world's spiritual traditions, human beings are created noble. As human beings, we are endowed with a great potential for love, altruism, solidarity, and justice. We can see these human capacities expressed in everyday life, everywhere in the world. Throughout human history, as well as today, there have been people who have sacrificed for others, for social justice, and the common good. So I propose that we need spiritual development to strengthen human moral capacity. This Baha'i text could serve as its overall direction. Let your vision be world-embracing rather than confined to your own self. Spiritual development would broaden our horizon and facilitate a deep understanding of our global interconnectedness, that humankind is one in its beautiful diversity, and that we are interdependent with all other life on Earth. It will unify people's support for policies and regulations that serve the well-being of all and that safeguard long-term environmental sustainability. It would also be a necessary foundation for abandoning nationalism and for creating a just and effective global governance, which is so much needed to safeguard the Earth and all its peoples. A spiritual outlook will also help us turn away from consumerism and be satisfied with less material things. Spiritual development would also address the worsening mental health crisis. We humans are spiritual beings and need to see profound meaning in life in order to be happy and healthy. Not dwelling on the ego, but focusing on the well-being of others and serving a higher cause for the common good provides this profound meaning. Such collective spiritual development would require major educational efforts from the grassroots, embracing all ages. In this effort, the voice of women is particularly powerful because generally women are ahead in the development of their capacity to nurture and care for others and to serve the long-term well-being of their family and community. The Baha'i community has learned from its worldwide spiritual education efforts that such education can empower women to actively work for social progress in their communities. They also show that spiritual education of both men and women contributes to a community's resilience to climate change impacts. For example, after Cyclone Pam hit their island of Vanuatu, some youth who have participated in a spiritual empowerment program first took care of the most vulnerable people in their community and helped them rebuild their houses. We don't want to rebuild an economy that exploits humans and destroys nature. Instead, we can build a world in which we live in peace with each other and in harmony with nature, in which everyone's basic needs are met, in which the equality of all human beings is recognized and put into practice, and in which decisions are taken based on science and reality and guided by the desire to serve the well-being of the greater good. The barriers are only in our own minds, and they can be overcome with spiritual development. So thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to our conversation now. Let's see how we do that. There we go.
So much, Christine. That's great. Thank you. So I thought we would have now, because two of our participants couldn't come, we thought we would have now just a general discussion based on some of the themes and comments, and not just questions to the panelists, but also to each other. So I know we were having a rather lively conversation earlier, also around, the state of the world in other dimensions. And I think it's really worthwhile to remember that the world that we're living in right now is, it's not just, it's not equal. It can be quite dangerous to many people as well as to the environment itself. And it has been very dangerous in the last years. And as we were talking about Ukraine in the last weeks, to, our own friends, family, and members of the human race, who are just trying to live their lives in the same ways that we are ourselves, trying to achieve the same comforts, the same benefits for their children, health and safety and welfare and well-being and a good education, food, water, all the things that everyone in the CSW community of women and men wishes to achieve for everyone. So I just open the floor now, and I know that people had different points that they were making. I slightly cut some people off. The other thing I wanted to just mention also was Maja's asking for narratives. I don't know if you want to expand a little bit more on that, Maja, before we open the floor for consultation.
Sure. Yeah, in case anybody has ideas or thoughts on that. So this Climate Governance Commission I've been setting up and running about new perspectives on how we, from the global perspective, global level, improve our mechanisms, our architecture, institution to manage the climate challenge, because we still have very weak architecture, unfortunately, which is not reliable at this moment. So I really want to have a strong gender narrative or thread in the next 2 years of the Commission's activity. So I'm just thinking about, because there are absolutely pockets of, gender and climate kind of activism and initiatives, but I feel like there aren't necessarily key narratives that are coming through that are yet becoming mainstream. There are prominent initiatives like Mary Robinson's work and others, and many prominent young women climate activists, for example, who are kind of breaking through to be very mainstream. But I'm trying to think about what kind of narratives, or how to have a very, very strong discourse on gender equality and the climate challenge. And for me, I think the governance one is very powerful, because we absolutely need women at all levels of governance to tackle it. But if anyone else had ideas or thoughts, and also just not just women as disproportionate victims of climate change and ecological disaster, which they are, but as protagonists. Like, I have friends also who are working with brilliant women entrepreneurs who are doing brilliant technology and other incredible projects, but they also aren't getting really mainstream attention.
Thanks so much, Maja. Could you, do you want people to contact you directly or some way? You could put that in the chat, or they can contact us and we can pass things on to you. So if that would be easier, I'll put my address into the chat. Pat, would you like to come in next, please?
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Maja and Christina. really interesting and both very stimulating in their own ways. But can I perhaps offer a slightly different perspective? I'm getting the impression from Maja that the work that she's talking about is at a high level, or certainly at a professional level. And one of the areas that I work in is very much at the grassroots level. And I have listened to Indigenous and rural women over the last week or so, particularly at CSW, but also in the past. And it seems to me that there is an enormous need to build the capacity of those women and girls at that local level within their own communities. And they have much more direct impact on being able to deal with climate change. They're very often the rural farmers dealing with the floods or the drought, whichever part of the world that you're in. And I think that there must be a way in which, picking up your point on education, Christina, that we can skill so many more women as women's organizations to be able to deal with the situation in their local communities, to be able to take the leadership in their local communities, to be able to make the changes that are needed specifically to deal with whatever crisis there is in that particular part of the world. And that has a knock-on effect on the local economy as well. So it's actually looking at the micro economy rather than the macro economy. So that's a very different perspective to the one that you just presented. Not saying yours isn't valid, but I'm just offering that as another way of looking at the way in which we can take forward after this awful pandemic. I mean, we're supposed to be talking about COVID recovery, but it's more than recovery, because, as you've both said, we need to make the changes now. So we've actually got the opportunity to actually make those changes instead of rebuilding, putting back exactly what we had before. Let's move it forward. Let's make all of those differences so that we can become more resilient. I'll stop there.
Thanks for that, Pat. Zareen, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Christine and Maja, for your presentations. Yeah, I had a lot of thoughts listening to them. One thought, one reflection is thinking about, and also what Pat said, thinking about Nasarian, which is an organization in Tanzania that Wendy and I work with. And what this is exactly an example of that, is that when women at the grassroots are empowered, within the right context, they can make huge changes. We set it up in 2010, and the last time I visited was actually 2017, because we were going to go back to COVID. And just within those 7 years, the change within the community was amazing. So although it's set up as a widows organization, and it's really about enabling the women to have the conversations and develop their own capacity in decision making, and then read their reality, and then try to make decisions in that context and so on. And it's not hugely funded. It's just like seed funding. They have to make an effort. They do their own stuff, and then they just help them on a bit in areas that they have themselves identified and so on. But what's happened is that, they've had training in FGM, they've had training in kind of the Tanzanian constitution and various other things. What's happened is that just as a result of these women getting together and sitting together and seeing each other and listening to each other and realizing they're not alone, the whole culture of their communities has changed in their in that widows is now no longer a taboo. And they've made some gains in terms of children going, girls going to school and so forth. But it's also now there's in the villages where there is Nassarian, there's no longer FGM. There's a reduction in violence against women. There is less child marriage, and so on and so forth. So and so this leads me to another thing, which is exactly linking with what you said, Pat, and that is that there is, Christine mentioned the experience of the Baha'i community around the world. And what is amazing about that for me is it is exactly what you just said. Like there's a film, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's Frontiers of Learning, it might be called, but there's a film that, and for me, one of the really interesting elements was that it kind of gave a case study of a place in India where the various projects in which the Baha'i community are trying to develop have been implemented. And you'd see a young woman riding on a bicycle, and she's going and she's kind of coordinating activities, and then you learn more about this young woman, and you can see how the culture has shifted. So young people are now being listened to, whereas with the culture, the hierarchy was older people were listened to. And this girl, her parents have said, okay, now we don't believe in caste anymore. We believe in, that all people are equal, and so therefore, and we believe in girls' education, and so therefore we haven't forced our daughters to get married. So she got married to somebody when she chose to, and it was somebody from another caste, and they're both involved in organizing intergenerational activities, which have developed a community. Now, for me, what was interesting about that was that this program that is being kind of developed around the world did not set up, in particular in India, to stop forced marriage, change the caste system, change dowry rights, etc. But that's the result. And so I think what you said is really pertinent, that when there is work in the field at the level of the family, at the level of the community, and change happens in those places, it has a huge societal transforming effect. And I think that's what there are examples of this around the world where it's working. And Maja, from your point, there is an organization, I don't know if you know about, I think it's called something tapestry, global tapestries or something, and it's exactly doing this. It's taking the narrative of indigenous women and their wisdom, and it's making that more available, and they're having these kind of online meaningful conversations about it, and I can certainly send you that information. And then the third point is, I think NAWO would be really interested, I think Pat and Wendy wouldn't, Alice, wouldn't we, Margaret, in and Justina, or from NAWO here, and members are also here, Susan and Yana, to move forward with this idea of making sure that this notion of the place of women in decision making and its importance is something that we would certainly be very interested in working on, I think.
Yes, thanks, Sareen. Christine, do you want to come in? And then Margaret.
Yeah, I had a thought listening to Pat and to Sareen, that both climate action as well as the promotion of basic women's human rights and equality have to really happen at all levels. And both of them are really kind of complex issues too. And they also work together, so we really need to work on the grassroots, starting with children's education, youth education, adult education, and then on the local communities, empowering women that they can raise their voices and be active, and also that they have access to higher education, especially also the farmers, that they have the opportunity to learn more about, for example, climate adapted seeds, seeds that are drought resistant or salt resistant. And then also on the national and then international level, in the government, we need women who promote the well-being of society. And climate action needs to happen everywhere, from our individual lives to how our local community gets the electricity, to the international level, trying to manage carbon on the global level. So it's really, it's a very complex issue, but if we have the right mindset, it's actually not that difficult. If we are committed to the equality of all human beings, and if we want to empower women, and if we really want to save the planet and future generations, if we have the will, we can do it, I think.
Thanks, Christine. Margaret Clark, please.
Thank you very much. I think it's been so informative and inspiring, you know, and it motivates you to change and change your way of thinking with all these thoughts that you've put forward. And it really is very much in line with what I was thinking and what we are teaching in Catholic social teaching as well. Whereas, you know, we're looking at subsidiarity, which is the place where you are. And I think this is what Pat was referring to, you know, where the people are, not going to some other place, level, class, but wherever the community is, and teaching them there in their own environment, in their own space. And I think that's really, really good, because you'll get people at all levels. It will be intergenerational, it will be cross communities, and you go to the marginalized as well as those that are at the high level who have access to information and changes. And solidarity of sharing all of this information is just wonderful. When the women were mentioned, and you know, women of the world in solidarity are a great way of transferring knowledge. You know, they say educate a mother and you educate the family, don't you pass it down. Not always the way, but a lot of the time. And I just think it's the way of redistribution of power in the communities. Really good. And then, of course, it goes in with their stewardship with our nature, and how, you know, we have a free market created the world, and yeah, I think it's leveling out, isn't it? You know, we don't want leveling up, or should we say? And I think that will reach all people if we look at it in a different way. You know, we're in an era of globalization, we're in an era of knowledge economy and international solidarity. And putting those all together, but using them wherever you are. It's like I was saying, you know, bloom where you stand. So do what you can wherever you are, and transfer this knowledge at whatever level you need to be. So yeah, just my input. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. I have my own reflection. Yesterday we were, or perhaps the day before, they're all sort of blending into one for me, listening to some of the challenges that women at the grassroots actually face. For example, just being able to access education, healthcare, especially migrant women. And they may actually have wonderful educational backgrounds, they may have skills, they may have talents and lots of wisdom, but the government structures into the places they migrate, including our own country here in the UK, do not allow them to use those talents for the betterment of themselves or for others. And so it just, and that was a very powerful, that particular speaker talking about some of the sort of internationally, the challenges that women, particularly migrant women, but also women who are working in 0 hours contract kind of environments and so forth, are still facing these kinds of structural changes. And so it seems to me that we need to be able to develop the capacities of people, you know, all of us, whether, whatever those capacities are, spiritual, moral, ethical skill sets, all kinds of capacities that we might have for logic and so forth. We need to learn how to draw more on science as well, and not simply just, interesting thoughts, but, scientific information. But we also need to have structures that are changed. And I think that's what Mara was basically talking about, that we cannot drag into a recovery from COVID or to help climate change by repeating this. And I think, Pat, you were also mentioning this, repeating the same attitudes and structures that have got us to where we are today. We know how that goes, because here we are in this situation with the war, on one side of this and climate change on the other, and many other challenges around us. So and also I think sometimes we think of these things as being in competition. It's either this or it's that. But in fact, all of these systems need to work together. So how do we create an environment in which we can draw on the wisdom of women, the experience of women, the lived experience of women, and at the same time develop the structures by including women in all the decision-making spaces? How can we also change those very structures so that we do not keep repeating this pattern of oppression and degradation of the planet over and over and over again? So I'll call on Susan and then Jenny, please.
Yeah, it was just a couple of observations. We've held quite a lot of events from November onwards because we had COP26 in Glasgow, and we had held a number of talks with young women, older women, women from all ages over Scotland regarding what they've seen, and we produced a report on it. And what they were saying was women are underrepresented in the climate discussions, and because of that, it actually puts them off getting involved. So actually, if there was more women in these discussions, then they would be more liable to get more involved in it and do more. And it was very telling, because at COP26 there wasn't a lot of women, but the next conference there's even less women than was at COP26. So it's really interesting how that has a dynamic approach on women that are seeing that, because they think it's not for them. So they automatically exclude themselves. So if I've got more women going to these things and being representative and actually speaking, like Pat was saying, to the women on the ground, making the information more accessible, making it more meaningful, surrounding it around the communities that they live in, then you're more liable to get them to have an action to move that forward and push that forward. In Scotland, we're trying to create this greener, fairer society and jobs, and that's part of the COVID recovery as well. We're involving women in the communities to think green, to think of ways to be sustainable and move forward. And that does start in the communities, and then it will go bigger and bigger. We've got a lot of wind farms, we've got offshore wind farms, we've also got wave energy that is being developed off the shores of Scotland, because obviously we get quite a lot of wind, quite a lot of rain, quite a lot of waves. So they're doing these kind of strategies, and again, women feel that they don't have enough education around what those jobs look like. But when we spoke to a couple of women that were actually in the industry, and what they were saying is there's things that could be done, like quotas, apprenticeships, for example. There was 17 women out of 170 apprenticeships in Scotland for renewable energy, and for her that wasn't good enough. For me, it wasn't good enough, and for the women that were on the call, it wasn't good enough. So there's things like that we can do from an earlier level of education to encourage women into STEM, to make it more appeasable. But there's also other jobs that actually, like we say, like we had an International Women's Day recently, and we had it at Parliament, and they were talking about actually women leaders do have, like you were stating, Maja, about that they have less CO2 emissions, they're a more caring society, they actually contribute less to that climate disaster that's pending for us all if we don't get a grip of it. And it's interesting because there's jobs that women can do, because of the skills that they have, that they probably wouldn't think that that would have a benefit to climate change, such as planning. Now, women are very good at organising. We've seen that during COVID and the COVID recovery. One of the things is that women have had to do is they've had to juggle care, they've had to juggle homeschooling, their own jobs, doing all this kind of stuff, organisation. And there's lots of jobs in planning. If we want to put planning positions through for green energies such as wind farms, offshore farms, we need planning permission to get all this stuff, and that is jobs that women can get involved in and then drive forward and see that's making a difference. So there's things like that can be done. Also, what they were saying is each person taking a small practical step themselves to make sure that they're reducing their carbon footprint, and if everybody does something like that, then it reduces it, and then it's like you were saying about the culture changes if you're all doing it in your community, and then that spreads out and it gets bigger, then before you know it, everybody's doing it. And like some of the things I've been on this week at CSW has just been fantastic, listening to small island communities and what they're doing and actually the difference that they're actually making. But we need to hold these world leaders accountable, and we need to get those voices of women to get that out there, and so that other women speak up, because I think for too long we've been in the shadows, but I think it's about time that we came out and actually made sure that we changed that. So that was just some observations from what we have been having, and especially with young women around STEM, around education. They are always navigated almost away from those kind of jobs, and I think that's training that we need to do with regards to our education, DWP, things like that, to say that actually STEM is a worthwhile job. Green energy is something that's coming for us, and if we don't change into that and we don't give them the skills to do it, then we're not going to move on. We're not going to have the women in these positions that will be able to inspire other women. So we need to look at that, and we need to look at it at an earlier intervention level as well.
Thanks so much, Susan. That was great. I know some people here on this screen were actually at COP in Glasgow themselves, and maybe you'll be able to mention something about that as well. Please, Jenny, go ahead.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. I was also going to say something about COP. I'll just briefly say that my background is I'm from the British Federation of Women Graduates. We were founded as the British Federation of University Women in 1907. And we helped to found the Graduate Women International, as it now is, centred in Geneva. And quite honestly, my head was in my hands when I heard, well, I gather is she now the full Minister for Women? Because of course it was supposed to be someone else who is rather busy with war. But I heard the Baroness, Debs, as she likes us to call her, oh, this is so important about childcare. Now, I was like this because we have been saying that since 1907, because one of the main themes we have is to enable women to combine their homekeeping and reproductive activities with their profession. Now, why all this time later are we still thumping on? Let's just become a talking shop. I'm sorry, like a lot of the men do. We need to get a timetable and commitments out of the government. In my view, there are far too many separate little organisations, with women in about their particular aspect. We've got to forget our differences. We've got to actually plug away at some of the main things we have needed for over a century, and actually get a commitment. I'm lucky. I live just over the borders of Cornwall. My local MP is a woman. She's a widow from her husband was killed in a fishing accident at sea. She always replies to me, but she can only be in one place at a time. I was a little bit shocked, and obviously this is probably to do with the fact that CSW has got far too many events available. When I mentioned this morning two aspects of the Secretary General's statement in the town hall yesterday. Now, I don't know how many of you were at the town hall, but it's fairly apparent that Charles Ramsden, who is, I understand, the head of our delegation, again, a man, okay, fine, Charles, but again, we've got to say why are the less of us at COP, and we've got to keep saying it. But basically, Secretary General yesterday said he had read all the major religious texts, the Quran, the Bible, none of them are patriarchal. It is only, let's face it, the male interpretations of these texts that has brought us into a patriarchal situation. If we go back to basics, whether it be Islam or Christianity, they are not patriarchal. A true religion, actually, I think in the Islam it refers to men and women are brothers and sisters, you know, in spirit and whatever. And we know the story which he quoted and he said, Antonio said, I am a Catholic, but he quoted the example of, you know, throw the first stone, he who is not without sin, with the woman taken in adultery. And the other horrifying fact, which again I quoted this morning, only 3% of governments around the world actually have a civil society with whom they talk. So all I'm saying is we're 136 years behind now, girls. I think we're all girls still. Worse because of COVID. We've got to keep at it. We've got to. I'm remembering my forebears in the suffragist movement rather than suffragettes. We've got to keep at it. We've got to keep pestering, asking for a timetable in a reasonable, controlled way. Less emotion, more get them pinned down. Anyway, I've said enough.
Thanks, Jenny. Just for those who are not here from the UK, may not know exactly what Jenny was speaking about. Our UK Civil Society Women's Alliance, of which the National Alliance of Women's Organization is the secretariat, have been holding daily briefings with our Government Equalities Office. And on some of those occasions, the Baroness Stedman Scott has been coming and speaking to us about that. Charles Ramsden is the liaison that we have at the Government Equalities Office for our organization. We've been meeting with him throughout, not only this year, but many other years as well, and the Government Equalities Office. He's not the head of our delegation. Here we have a chief negotiator who's doing the negotiations. There's a head of mission, there's the ambassadors, there's many other elements to that. But Charles is the person that we know best, and he often was able to send our messages. I have Margaret on asylum seekers, but Zara, do you want to also just come in on that very point?
I just wanted to say that our ambassador is female and the lead negotiator, Joyce, is female. So actually, it's just a point of clarification. And Charles is an absolute champion for equality. So, and I think that having the Baroness there, Baroness Stedman Scott, she's only recently become a Baroness. It's only a few years, and she was very much involved in the civil society sector before then. So actually, she's a real champion for us, I think. And it was a coup really to have her at our meeting, because usually the ministers don't attend those briefings. So she turned up and she invited us to join her in meetings. So that's good. And actually, just on, that's another story.
Thanks. I'm going to ask Margaret if you come in and talk about asylum seekers. I want to turn back to our two speakers just briefly also for their comments, if they would.
Yes, just when we're trying to be inclusive with people and asylum seekers coming in, what we're doing in the northeast of England is looking at the people who are so talented and got skills. Like we have doctors who can't work in a hospital because they are not allowed to work. And there might be an asylum seeker for 5 years, for 10 years, for 20 years sometimes, very long times. And so we have them now training. Once they've got right to stay, they're training in the hospitals and becoming doctors. And if they can't, they're not allowed to work, they're volunteering and working with it to keep their skills up. It's just fantastic what the work they're doing. And another occasion, all women in one of our Optimus meetings, actually, and they said that they're losing their skills, or the media skills. One was a journalist, not allowed to work. And we supported her throughout when she came as an asylum seeker with her children from Zimbabwe. And she's just fantastic. So we've taken it up now with a local newspaper and with the government, and we're lobbying, and we're getting this kind of mentoring and what to call it, not shadowing, like sponsoring them, so that they're like almost like an apprentice, so they can use their skills in a voluntary capacity. Because one of them there had been over 5 years and losing her skills that she had come with as a professional in her own country. And it's really good. So it's been, you know, there was mention of it going on Women's Hour in you know, on BBC radio, but also in the national papers. So I know whether it'll come up, but we can use their skills. We need their skills, but it's good for both parties. And so I thought that just mention that in case you have it, you know, in your area. And the other point, if I can just say about the climate change, I don't know whether you've heard of this app. It's called Act Now, capital ACT, capital NOW. And it's the United Nations campaign for individual action on climate change and sustainability. And it's called Act Now. And at the last count through the mobile app of the chat box, there'd been nearly 5.5 million climate actions recorded. So, you know, just if you can't do it through an organization or whatever, as an individual, then you can have it recorded. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Margaret. I'd like to turn back to our speakers now, but anybody else also, if they'd like to make any comments about this, about some of the things that you might have heard and some of the points that you'd perhaps like to raise. Maybe Maja, would you like me to stop the recording, Maja, while you?
No, it's okay.
It's easy enough.
It's okay. No,
okay.
I can comment.
Okay.
But no, it's really lovely to listen to everybody and to hear the various thoughts and insights from all different dimensions and places. And Susan, that report you mentioned sounds really interesting. If you have the link, if you can share it in the chat, sounds very, very interesting about the survey you did. That sounds really, really interesting. Yeah, maybe something that kind of leapt out to me in the comments, well, or something I'd love to comment on is kind of the high level versus the community grassroots. And, you know, is that, or should it be conceived as such a dichotomy? Or I think, Wendy, you were saying like they're all interrelated, and that is also very much my feeling in working. And I think everybody should be contexted in local communities of various sorts, and of course your home community. But I just wanted to note also, like at the international level, even, you know, the macro work, but the reality is we have planetary issues that we have to govern, we have to take care of. So we have to have the international level, and it doesn't have to be an elite space or a remote space. And indeed, I feel like there are these very, very strong community dynamics in these international policy spaces that can be very healthy communities, that can be very gender balanced or women showing leadership, and are really important, sort of these micro communities at the international level, to have those healthy, very healthy community dynamics. And we see also dynamics of like the global to local kind of collapsing in like a positive way, where you have Indigenous people, for example, from various parts at the COP summit and involved in various UN discourses from very local communities. Also, but I completely agree about the power of getting really engaged in the transformative potential at the local level, which every single local level around the world counts. At the Climate Governance Commission, we're also looking for ways that local initiatives can be scaled up. Okay, there's like diversity and specific particularly in every local situation. But for example, we're working with this project in the Netherlands called Orchid City, which is like a sustainable, holistic kind of community model which also looks at well-being as well as sustainability. And they're doing projects in various regions and parts of the world, trying to have like locally, culturally contexted. So how could that local, those local engagements also be shared at the global level? And also I wanted to note, also like that local community engagement is not just for, countries that are, not considered developed countries or distant countries to Europe or the West, but also in the West, that community building is so vital and important, and so there's so much work to be done on gender and of course sustainability. And if you're looking at CO2 impact, the more you do in local Western communities, the more impact you'll have. And I was just thinking of some of my local heroes in the town I grew up in it's called Port Hardy, British Columbia. It's about 4,000 people now, about 5,000 when I was growing up. But my heroes, community heroes there, are women who are organizing and leading the seniors society in my town, where I'm a member, actually. I'm not technically a senior yet, but they're so inspiring and wonderful. It's like female led just because they have these amazing project management, and they're just such brilliant connectors and relators. And for me, it's like that kind of governance, that would be so amazing to see at every level. And I've seen that in British Columbia, at the national, the provincial parliament. And now we're working with like quite a young female foreign minister in Canada on this international anti-corruption court project, which I'm working. So I think, all levels and the levels should interweave, should influence each other. But I've seen in my, in Western Canada, this incredible potential of that, just what people were talking about, this transformative impact of women leading and finding their voices and really helping to, transform a whole community. So I just wanted to share that.
Thanks so much, Maja. So this concept of, the thing about all institutions, that they're all made up of people, that's the thing. And also for me, the concept that we have to change the structures to enable people from the grassroots to speak in them. At the moment, they are excluded. And here we are in civil society. We could be at the United Nations today, but we're not. We're here in my bedroom, in your bedroom, in your space, because a civil society has been becoming excluded. And if people who are activists already are becoming excluded, how much more excluded are the people whose voices we're trying to shine a light on? And until we change the structures, they will never be included, no matter how terrific they are. And that's what we're trying to do here at CSW, it seems to me. Christine, can I turn to you too and have your sort of comments as well, please?
I have so many thoughts about what you have been saying. So it's a little difficult to find something to share. But what struck me was when Margaret talked about individual actions. That's where women already have power everywhere in the world. Now, I would qualify that in some places where women are really very poor, they don't have any choice. They actually have to, like cut down their forests to get the wood in order to cook their food. They don't have a choice. So that is really the responsibility of the world community to change the systems. But many women, especially in the West, they have a choice. And of course, that also requires some education, because women usually they want to work for the well-being of their family. They want to have healthy families. They want to have a healthy society, but they need to learn also more about the impacts of their decisions, even like what we are cooking, what what kind of food we eat, how we transport ourselves, you know, what we buy. Do we really need all of that stuff for our children? How do we educate our children? You know, this has tremendous impact. So I think we also need to somehow reach out to women to tell them you have power in your decisions in the grocery store and in everyday life, and of course in their professions too. But this really applies to everyone, how you educate your children and what kind of choices you make, whether they are environmentally sustainable and socially responsible. But often it's a lack of awareness. It's not a lack of solidarity with people. So I think that both need to be strengthened, the knowledge as well as a world embracing vision. You know, we need both. So that's my thoughts.
Thanks so much, Christine. So I just wanted to see if some other people would like to see Maureen's just put something in. Maureen, would you like to just say what you have to say? It would be great to hear your voice.
Yes, I have listened with interest. And the reason I come to CSW is because when we had the Women's National Commission in our country, how many years ago? And I was at a meeting where they were talking about women leaders and getting women involved in doing this, that, and the other. And I said, where are these women? They asked. And I stood up and said, well, I think a lot of them are at home looking after their families. Do we actually ask women what they want? Do we have to tell them that they have to work, that they have to be leaders, that they have to be part of the economy, earning money? And I think this is what is wrong with society. All our relations are transactional and not relational. And I think that's what Christine was saying, you know, that we need to get back to a society where we care for one another, where we want to help one another. And certainly in the Catholic Church, one of the things that we are trying to do is to be good neighbours to everybody, to help those who are in need. And certainly for many years, our aid workers who have gone out to areas where people have asked for help, they don't want money, they don't want charity, but what they want is to be able to enabled to help themselves. So our aid workers go out and they work with the community and say, well, what is it that you need? How can we help you? So in some cases, it might be helping to build a well so that they have water to be able to grow crops. For some, it might be buying animals for them so that they can start a small community farm or something. And it isn't just aid, it's a case of lending them the money so that they can help themselves and build up their own community. And then what they do then is they want to pay the money back that they've borrowed, but also they want to lend the money that they have managed to save to help other people to become a better community, so that they share their wealth. And I think that's probably what's wrong. Look at these billionaires coming out of Russia, and there are so many people in Russia who are starving, homeless, because these oligarchs have skimmed off all the profits so that they can buy houses in Kensington and football clubs and the rest of it. So, you know, where is the work ethic of some of these people? I mean, it's nearly as bad in this country, isn't it? Where you've got people who are in the job to make money rather than to help the people that they are employing or who are working. Why are we on 0 hours contracts? You know, why haven't people got proper jobs? So I think, you know, we need to have a different change of heart. This is what Pope Francis is saying all the time. We need to have a change of heart. It isn't about making people happy because they've got lots of money and they can do things that people with lots of money can do. You know, one thing that COVID did bring about for a lot of people was the fact that they had been able to be with their families, they had been able to work together in the community, help one another. And it was that relational aspect where you looked at other people's needs and not just your own, working together to build your community. And that's what Together for the Common Good is doing. So they they will go into a community. I mean, it worked in Liverpool in the poorer areas and in the big cities where you've got areas of deprivation. So a group will go in. It's usually church-based, but they don't go into the churches. They go out into the community and they look for the people who need help. So you might have an area where there are lots of homeless people, or there are lots of people who, you know, you've got the drug barons there as well. So they will go into the community and ask people who are interested in making a change to come together, and they talk to each other and they say, well, you know, what are the problems? What do the people who live there, what do they see as the problem, and how do they think they can overcome the problem? So they work together, and sometimes it does need expertise. Sometimes you need legal aid, and sometimes you need people to be advised about how they need to look after their own health. So consequently, they work together as the community, and they find that, you know, it starts off with a small group, but eventually it filters out to the rest of the area, and people who have come to be come to ask for help end up being volunteers to help other people, but it's just in small pockets. And if that could reach out, I mean, it's happened in one of the I wish I could remember the name of the country. It's one, I don't know whether it's they're recovering from the drug barons and, you know, from the drug trade, and the women there have actually, it was one woman who started it. She sat in the middle of the village under the tree where the people used to meet in better times, and she used to sit there, and as people went by she said hello and, you know, asked them how they were, and then people started to gather and it grew. So then they because they were a bigger group, and they all started to relate to one another, because when you've got an area controlled by drug barons, you're terrified to speak to anybody because you don't know whether you're going to be shot the next day. But anyway, they managed to get everybody in the village involved to change the culture, so that they said, well, we're not going to grow drugs, we'll grow to suit ourselves, and we'll grow so that we can flourish as a village. And it worked, and it's actually filtering out through other villages in their district, and I think they're hoping that it will go on through the country. But I think one of the things that is really tragic is the fact that, you know, the people are being asked to work to produce goods for other people and food for other people, and they haven't got time to grow their own food, or the land to grow their own food and help their own families. So it's I don't know how we solve it.
Thank you so much, Maureen. You have a lot of emotion.
I keep trying.
Well, we're just coming to the very, very end of our session here today, and I want to just thank our two speakers, Maja and Christine, and apologize for the fact that we didn't have the other speakers with us today. But thank you all for coming today and being part of this interesting discussion. I think what we've learned, isn't it, that the conversation, especially these last half hour or so, about the need for each, to be supportive of each other, to reach out to each other, to honor the efforts of people at all levels, that we need both governance and we need people working collaboratively at the grassroots, that we have the skill sets that are required. We have the knowledge that's required, and the things that we don't know, we can easily learn and from our experience and from others. Thing is, we're trying to create a better world, aren't we? This is the whole point of what we're doing here. And in my view, this is an all hands on deck work that has to happen. We can't afford to leave anybody behind. So National Alliance of Women's Organizations is dedicated to enabling people to work collaboratively, women particularly, to make sure that the women's voice is heard, but also women's actions are accepted and appreciated, and that women are able to rise not into positions such as men in the ways that men may have, but in a different way, in a way that actually honors all the points of view that have been taken here, the need for care, the need for love, if you like, the need for a world-embracing vision, all these concepts. These are some of the things that we're advocating at NAWO, and I really appreciate all of your attendance here. And I won't close the meeting, but I will stop the recording at this point. If people want to carry on for a little while, they can do so.